Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper from ICAD, speaking to you from Jerusalem. This is my October 2025 monthly update. And of course, what we have to do today is mark and evaluate where we are on this second anniversary of the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023, and the subsequent genocide, ongoing genocide, and destruction that it's generated. We have to really keep, in my view, it's a very complex and obviously emotional issue, and one that's really crucial for us politically. And we have to keep the political focus, uh, even while we don't lose the human focus, the human element as well, that in my view is very important in our work. So the attack on October 7th, I think, has to be dissected in terms of three levels that are really important for us to understand. First of all, the attack itself. I was actually in London when it happened. I remember watching Al Jazeera and some of the other networks, and actually many people expressed, and I felt myself, an admiration for the military operation that Hamas conducted as we were listening on the early hours of October 7th. This was a military operation, well planned, well executed, broke through Israeli lines, entered into Israel, and from the point of view of political resistance, of even military resistance, to 130 years of settler colonialism. In other words, October 7th, as we often say, did not start on October 7th. It wasn't simply an attack. It was, as Israel tries to present it, it was a military operation to try to break the siege of Gaza and move forward the Palestinian struggle of the last 130 years against Zionist settler colonialism. It was a very important and crucial political context to what was happening, especially with the genocide that's built into settler colonialism on the basis of 58 years of occupation in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, almost 80 years of the occupation of all of Palestine, and of course, 18 years of a siege of Gaza that had preceded the attack. So, from a military point of view, it was absolutely a justified and even admirable attack to be able to break through the Israeli defenses. And I think many of us felt a sense of admiration and really a sense that this was a major military, political event. And had it, of course, been directed, as some of the indications are that it was, at least in principle, directed towards Israeli soldiers, capturing, and you know what, in a military operation, even fighting and killing soldiers, it would have indeed been a significant military operation. What happened, of course, as the hours went on and we began to see the full extent of what was happening, and this is the second level of the October 7th attack that I think we have to at least address and accept. And that is that once it became clear that civilians were being killed, hundreds of civilians, including young people, uh, what had become an admirable military operation was sullied and became, at least in good part, a massacre and a war crime. Uh, you are allowed to attack and kill and capture soldiers. The soldiers that Israel that Hamas holds are not hostages; they're captives, and that's allowed in war. Obviously, Israel has about 10,000 Palestinian captives in its own prisons that the Palestinians consider political prisoners. That's a part of the military operation. But once you begin to attack civilians, and we are all, obviously criticizing Israel for that, properly so, but it has to be as well for resistance organizations. Resistance movements like Hamas and the Islamic Jihad have a responsibility to maintain discipline. They can't allow their attacks simply to go and become wanton attacks on everybody in their way. This is a hard thing to ask of resistance movements because they don't always have the resources. They're obviously in chaotic situations in which once the organized militaries of states like Israel begin to organize and counterattack, of course, they're really in a difficult, it's almost impossible to maintain that kind of a discipline. Things have to be done quickly. There are a lot of, it happened on October 7th, a lot of non-Hamas people that joined in that simply exploited the breaking through of the fences. And of course, it's also not fair because states ignore international law and human rights. I mean, Israel's engaged in a genocide of, we don't know how many, it could be up to 200,000 people. Some of the statistics say in Gaza, in which 83%, according to Israel's own figures, 83% of those killed are civilians. So even though states do not abide by international law, human rights conventions, nonetheless, we have to insist on that. And that insistence also goes to resistance organizations, in my view. I think we can understand the outrage that the Palestinians felt, the emotion and everything that went into the attack. But nevertheless, that part of the attack cannot be justified. And in fact, it really became counterproductive for the Palestinian cause. Because what happened, of course, is that it overshadowed the justifiable political military reasons for October 7th. And you know, which was the ongoing Palestinian struggle for its national rights in its homeland. And so what it did, unfortunately, and this is what we're still trying to struggle with, of course, is it reduced a justified military operation to one of terrorism. And Trump's plan and all the political discourse around it reduces the entire Gazan and Palestinian issue to, of course, one of massacre and hostages. The whole dynamic of Trump's plan is to release the hostages, and then whatever crumbs we can throw Hamas, we'll throw them. But basically, it really has kind of sidelined to some degree the wider and the justification of the Palestinian struggle. And at the same time, we have to be careful too that our own outrage that Israel's and supported by the U.S. as genocide does not come at the expense of political resolution. We have to retain a political focus through all of this, because I'm hearing many people say, and it's understandable, that now's not the time to talk about a political program for the future. From our point of view of supporting the Palestinian struggle, because a genocide is taking place. First, we deal with the genocide, and then we'll see. Or that we don't want to deal with the future because we'll never be able to live together. Those are understandable emotional responses, certainly during a genocide, but nonetheless, we have to multitask because these political processes are happening. And we can't be linear. We don't determine the timetable. And so we can't allow the emotion of the genocide, strong as it is, powerful it is on us, to prevent us from nonetheless dealing with the political aspects and how do we move forward out of this tragedy. We can't give up our political focus. We certainly can't allow Gaza to become an issue on its own, disconnected from the wider Palestinian issue that's happening. The big danger, of course, is that all the international support, even from governments that Palestinians are getting today, all have to do with Gaza. And once the fighting is over, the hostages are back, political prisoners are released, and the emotion and the attention begins to die down, then we're going to go back to the same situation where Israel can continue its genocide, displacement, home demolitions, land expropriation, settlement in the West Bank, and lead on peacefully after a brief time of a kind of industrial quiet to the Abraham Accords and normalizing Israeli apartheid. So we really have to be on the political barricades here in terms of not allowing Gaza to either become an issue on itself, by itself, isolated from the wider Palestinian issue, or to allow, the political momentum to die down after the actual fighting in Gaza does die down. Because there's a real danger here that the Palestinian struggle gets lost in all of these things. It gets lost in the attack on civilians and the whole discussion that raises about terrorism and the delegitimization of Hamas, the delegitimization of the whole Palestinian struggle. And it also has to do with the negotiations over the Gaza peace talks that again focus on hostages. Uh, and the Palestinian issue itself gets lost in the bigger processes at work. In other words, the Palestinian issue is important. Here, the United Nations and a lot of countries have joined and recognized a Palestinian state. But when it really comes down to actually dealing with the Palestinian struggle and its needs and the needs for liberation, the Palestinians often get lost in the shuffle among states, these larger political processes. And in fact, the Palestinian struggle is caught today among 5 political processes that really threaten to lead to an internationally accepted Israeli apartheid regime over all of Palestine. I mean, the first process is, of course, the Gaza peace plan that again sidelines the actual Palestinian issue or the actual Gazan issue of the right of Palestinians to even rule in Gaza. Here we're looking at a peace plan that envisions Trump as the CEO and Blair as sort of the commanding officer of a U.S., British, internationally run Gaza, in which the Palestinians are completely marginalized. See? And so and so again, even in terms of Gaza itself, the Palestinians become somewhat sidelined. It leaves Israel under permanent military control, the Trump plan. It relieves Israel of all responsibility for the death and destruction it caused. And even the reconstruction of Gaza would be done internationally or by the Arab states, with Israel not even asking to contribute 1 penny. So we even see with the Gaza peace plan, specific it is as it is on Gaza, how the Palestinians and their rights and their struggle are being sidelined. The second process that's happening in the Middle East, we forget about, is Trump's vision of peace. Trump has a peace plan that he's actually actively pursuing on the sidelines in the shadows of what's happening in Gaza. And this is where I'm saying it's very dangerous to say, look, first let's deal with the genocide and then we'll see about a peace process. Trump and the others don't work that way. They're actively working now to determine what exactly is the outcome of Gaza and all these negotiations, bringing in the Arab states, of course, even as this is all going on. His vision for peace plan, so-called, part of his deal of the century, presented in 2020, was for basically for 2 states, but in an apartheid regime. Because in the plan he presented, that was accepted by Netanyahu, Israel is accepted. Its existence, political, legitimacy is accepted by the Arab world and, of course, by the international community, including all its settlements. The settlements are not dismantled in his plan, which means that Israel expands on to 80 or 85% of Palestinian territory, and the Palestinian state that emerges, because there has to be a state, right? Even though we all notice that when the French-Saudi initiative brought out the vote and the support for recognizing a Palestinian state, it was a state without borders. So that kind of a state could fit very well into a Bantustan, into a South African type apartheid regime. A series of disconnected enclaves in the West Bank, whatever remains of Gaza, and to create a non or semi-sovereign entity, not viable. But this is the Trump peace plan. There's a map for it if you look up Trump's vision for peace. And don't forget, in 2020 and after, East Jerusalem was annexed to Israel. The American embassy did move to Israel. The Golan Heights were annexed. So these are ongoing plans. They're not something of the past, and they're not something that people are focusing on now because we're focused on Gaza, but we're losing that bigger picture, that wider picture is what I'm arguing. And the third process that's going on is the Abraham Accords that are the operational part of Trump's vision for peace. Because the vision for peace isn't a peace between Israelis and Palestinians. There's no negotiations here. Palestinians were never consulted in Trump's plan. They were certainly never consulted when Trump allowed Israel to annex East Jerusalem illegally in international law, and not consulted in terms of their future as well. And this is certainly true for the Abraham Accords, that are a political process between states, the United States, Israel, and the different Arab regimes. Saudi Arabia being the big holdout, even though it's anxious to normalize with this greater Israel, it's the jewel in the crown. So all these, the Abraham Accords seek to normalize Trump's vision for peace or normalize the regime of Israeli-controlled two-state apartheid over all of Palestine, and this with the complicity of the Arab states and many Muslim states. I mean, look what went into now these so-called negotiations where the Palestinians are excluded over Gaza that are happening today and yesterday in Cairo. You know, the Arab regimes. I mean, Trump sat down with Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia, right? And came up with this plan that is an anti-Palestinian plan. It's a plan for a colonial takeover of Gaza, for permanent Israeli control over Gaza, for the dismantling of Hamas as a political and military force, with nothing for a Palestinian Authority. A Palestinian Authority might come in symbolically to sort of administer Gaza. That's part of the plan, but only if it's reformed. And what does reform mean? Well, Netanyahu said it very clearly in the White House last week. It means the Palestinian Authority, which is a collaborationist regime set up to basically ensure Israeli security control over the West Bank and Gaza until it was thrown out of Gaza. The reform means that this Palestinian Authority would have to accept Israel as Jewish state, accept the settlements, accept Trump's vision for peace that includes all the settlements, give up really any Palestinian claim to historic Palestine, be satisfied with this Bantustan of little enclaves that Trump and Netanyahu are planning, and also to end not to use international law that's at the Palestinians' disposal, not to go to the ICJ, not to go to the ICC, suspend all legal proceedings against Israel, and so on and so on. So that all these are processes that are happening. We're on the cusp of them. They're impending. They're coming right now, and we're not relating to them. Partly because we're focused on Gaza, and I think we've lost some. We're so focused on Gaza that we've lost the bigger picture. But also because I think we don't really understand the importance of this normalization process. I've talked about this before at length. You know, you're not going to get 300,000 people out of the streets of London over normalization. You mobilize people around genocide, around occupation, around apartheid, around the outrages that Israel commits, and so on. But the real significant political processes going on, quiet, invisible, behind the scenes, among states, without Palestinians, are really not being focused on by our movements today. And I think it's and I think Gaza is feeding into that. And certainly the idea that we're not going to deal with that now, let's deal with Gaza first and the genocide, is understandable, but it's counterproductive politically. The fourth level, without making this too long a lecture, the fourth political process, of course, is what we just talked about, the international recognition of a Palestinian state. So here again, you have a tremendously well-publicized opening of the United Nations, the General Assembly, kind of an event that means nothing whatsoever. It's even almost less than symbolic. It means that yes, we support the Palestinian rights in a general way. We support the Palestinian issue, but we're not really, we the states, the international system, are not really going to support a genuine Palestinian state, even if we all know this two-state solution, or simply a two-state solution, even that gives the Palestinians all of the occupied territory, is not just. Because in fact, the Palestinian struggle is an anti-colonial struggle for all of Palestine. And Israel shouldn't even be accepted as a legitimate side. Since when is a colonial regime legitimate or moral or legal? This should really be a negotiation between the Palestinians and maybe the international community in terms of what do we do with Israelis once we've decolonized Palestine and now we have a state for all its citizens. Now, how do we live together? I'm part of a one democratic state movement, and these are the questions that we're asking. But the whole two-state idea that legitimizes and even gives controlling power to a colonizing force, you know, and then that leads to some kind of a two-state solution is, of course, completely, unjust and fake. And so the idea the international community is recognizing the Palestinian state without borders simply means that it's letting itself off the hook. It's addressing the outburst of support that have been for Palestinians, especially over Gaza, over the last couple of years, but addressing it in a way that does not expend any political capital, that is not real. All right, so that these are all the processes going on that in which, in a way, the Palestinian struggle is getting lost in the shuffle. And we especially have to focus, I want to say, on the processes of two of the processes that are the most important, but are not the ones that we're focusing on. And that's Trump's vision for peace plan that has yet to be formalized and completed, but Huckabee in Jerusalem is working on that very hard. And the extension of that, which is the Abraham Accords. These have to be on our focus, even as we focus on Gaza. And finally, there's even a fifth thing going on, and that's a whole political reconfiguration of the Middle East. In this whole change that's happening, and this is going to be another result of the Abraham Accords, not only are the Palestinians being lost in the shuffle, not only is a two-state apartheid regime being created before our eyes as a so-called two-state solution, but Israel is getting stronger. Israel is becoming a co-hegemon here in the Middle East. In other words, Israel has become the NATO surrogate, the US surrogate in the Middle East. You can see it with the attacks on Iran and the Houthis and its wider ties, military ties to the Arab regimes. They're dependent on Israel, the Arab countries. And so Israel is really being accepted not only in terms of its control over Palestine. That's the price. What the Arab world is saying is, and a lot of the Muslim world is saying, like Indonesia and Pakistan and Morocco and other Muslim countries, what they're saying is, we will recognize you as a greater Israel, controlling all of Palestine with some crumbs for Palestinians, on condition that you actually become the military co-hegemon of the region, that we can rely on you to protect our interests, political, military, economic in particular, against any kind of challenges, from the outside. And the other co-hegemon, of course, is Saudi Arabia, which is taking on the role of an economic co-hegemon. So we're moving to a place today where Israel is actually becoming a greater Israel in the terms of really becoming the military hegemon of the entire Middle East region. So these are things. Now, how does that affect the Palestinian struggle and wider. I talk about global Palestine. This goes on and on in terms of Israel's role in the world and imperialism in the world. For example, where are the BRICS countries? The BRICS countries are supposed to be this alternative, global South alternative to NATO, the US, and the global North. Well, it turns out that Israel is a major arms supplier to China and Russia. We haven't heard from China and Russia in great support of the Palestinians in all of this. India, which is a key member of the BRICS bloc, loves Israel. It's murderous Hindu nationalism, the murderous Hindu nationalism of Modi, that would like to wipe out itself the 300 and some million Muslims in India, has very close ties with Zionism, historically and until today. And India is actually Israel's main arms customer today. So we have to put everything that's happening with Palestine into a much, much wider perspective than we are. And this is what I call a global Palestine. So, I'm trying to set out here, I guess, a wider picture in which we as supporters of the Palestinian struggle, but hopefully led and given more direction by the Palestinians, we have to really figure out our way through all of this. How do we advance the Palestinian struggle? How do we achieve a just peace here? But going on, how do we control these destructive forces going on in the Middle East, of these autocratic repressive regimes pursuing a super capitalist agenda, that involves not only the US and NATO but the BRICS countries as well? Where does that leave all of us? All of us, the billions of people in the world that are concerned for the invisible, powerless peoples. The Palestinians maybe being in our attention. Now this is global Palestine, but including everything from the Sudanese, to the Uyghurs, to the Tibet, to all the peoples of the world being repressed everywhere who are invisible. What does global Palestine mean in terms of our ability to affect government's policies, to become political actors? Right now we're pretty marginalized, and I think just as the Palestinians have been marginalized, I think we all are too. So I think this whole question of the struggle of global Palestine has implications for all of us, for people that don't even care about Palestine, that are involved in other issues. I think this is all relevant. So in the meantime, we have to prevent the Palestinian struggle from getting lost in the shuffle and from getting delegitimized. We have to keep our focus on Gaza, remaining Palestinian, and on Israel's violent campaign of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. We have to keep the focus on Trump's and Netanyahu's plans of imposing two-state apartheid, and on this disastrous normalization process of Greater Israel through the impending completion of the Abraham Accords. We have to keep a political focus. In the meantime, we all struggle on. Myself and ICAD extended our support for the Free Gaza Flotilla, for the global Gaza Sumud Flotilla that was just intercepted the other day. Some of the people are still being held prisoner here in Israel. We extend our support for this flotilla coming in the following week, and for all other acts of public resistance. I was a member of the first Free Gaza Flotilla in August 2008. We were two boats, the Free Gaza and the Liberty. We were not humanitarian. We were a political flotilla coming to Gaza to break the siege. And we did break the siege. We managed to get into Gaza, spend 3 or 4 days with our Gazan partners there. We were the first foreign boat to land in Gaza in over 40 years. And so as a member of the first Free Gaza Flotilla, I, in the name of ICAD, extend our support to all the important works of resistance that are being done today. We also invite you, and this is a part of the solidarity, to come to Palestine to really spend time with Palestinians and their anti-colonial Israeli partners and comrades. ICAD has a study tour of the West Bank and into Israel itself from November 10th to the 20th. We do two study tours every year, and the Palestinians are asking for us to come, for you to come in solidarity and be here as they're under attack. They're feeling isolated. And ICAD gives you a tremendous opportunity to meet them on the ground, to meet the local leadership here for an 11-day tour from November 10th to the 20th. You can get all the information on the ICAD website, which is also a great source of materials and resources and analysis that I think you'd all find really useful. So follow us and learn about the study tour on our ICAD website. And I'll be in the UK from October 28th to November 7th. We're having an ICAD conference, the details of which you can also find on our website. And I'll be traveling around the country on a speaking tour. So I hope I get a chance to see some of you when I'm in the UK. So, in the end, these are really crucial times. I hope my analysis, as long as it is, and as maybe contorted as it is, still helps clarify things and helps us keep our political focus. We can't only be protest, we can't only be resistance, we can't only react to these tremendously emotional and important events that are happening. We have to become proactive actors together with the Palestinians and to try to find a way of dealing with the governments that are not our friends by any means. I'll leave it at that. Free Palestine, and we'll talk. Bye.